So Jesus says that a prophet is not without honor except in his own family, his own village, his own kin, among his own kin. He was too familiar to them. They couldn't see beyond what they thought they already knew. Okay, well, I think that gospel is there for us too. We have to ask ourselves, is Jesus too familiar to me? Do I think I already know Jesus? We're members of his household after all, his church, his body even. We can think we already know Jesus when we don't. And he may be astonished at us, at our lack of faith. So we have to ask ourselves, so we have to overcome what the first reading calls this hardness of heart, this obstinacy of mind. We have to do what the psalm says. We have to lift up our eyes to the Lord, lift our eyes to the Lord in our own hearts. We gaze anew on Christ and on his mystery, so we go beyond the easy formulas. Oh, Jesus is the Son of God, he's the King of the universe, he's the Redeemer of the world. Well, what does that mean? And what are the deeper dimensions of Christ? And I think a key to understanding something deeper, maybe even the main thing that's deeper, is in the second reading today. That astonishing passage from St. Paul, 2 Corinthians. He's just been recounting all the things he's suffered and all the things he's done for the Lord, and even his intimate and profound mystical prayer experiences. And then he goes on to say, and he even adds, it was to keep me from getting too inflated, I had this thorn in the flesh. And that's where we get the phrase, thorn in the flesh, is from this passage of St. Paul. A thorn in the flesh. And we don't know what that is. Paul was apparently too embarrassed to tell us exactly what it was. But it was something he couldn't overcome. He couldn't manage, he couldn't figure out, couldn't control despite all the other things he was doing. And so he asked the Lord, take this away, please. It's an inconvenience. And God said, nothing doing. My grace is enough for you. And Paul began to realize there was as we should, that there's an important lesson there about human life, about the way God works, about who God is. So he said, well, okay, now I'm content then with my weaknesses. That the power of Christ may dwell, well, actually what it says in the original Greek is that the power of Christ may dwell over me, on me. Same word, same related word that's used in the prologue of St. John, where it says that the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, pitched his tent. Same root here. The power of Christ kind of pitches its tent over me. In other words, it's a great protection, it's a great reassurance, but it doesn't belong to him. It's not in him. It's not his power. It's simply there overshadowing him, like the Holy Spirit over the Virgin Mary, for that matter. It's important to realize that, well, it's Christ's power. But I'm content with my weaknesses, he said, in order that the power of Christ may dwell. That's the key. That's the gateway. That's the narrow gate, even, if you will, to the power of God, is our own weakness. Who knew? This probably surprises us. Not what we thought we knew about God, about Christ. We're supposed to be strong. We're supposed to be virtuous, have heroic virtue. We're supposed to have willpower. And then we're going to climb the heavens. And that's nonsense. That's absurd. It's not true. You can't do it. So that was what God was teaching Paul, and hopefully what he's teaching us is, no, the royal road to God is your weakness. It's that shadow part of yourself that you can't control, that you can't understand, that doesn't fit into your categories, that you can't manage, that's too strong for you. But that's part of you. And Paul says, including the external sufferings as well. So that's part of our human weakness also. That's the royal road to God and his power and his compassion. It is the sufferings and the difficulties and the sickness and the death and all the things externally that we can't control either. All the mysteries of human weakness, human suffering, what the Buddhists call dukkha, as the primary first noble truth, that the world is suffering, is inadequate, it's insufficient, we can't control it, we can't grab it, we can't manage it. Human condition. So it's a good thing that that's the royal road to God, because that's all we have. That's who we are. And God is telling us that's fine, because that's how you will discover me. So Paul finishes by saying, gladly, very gladly, it's a superlative, most gladly will I boast of my weaknesses in order that Christ's power may dwell in me, because it's precisely when I'm weak that I'm strong. How's that for a paradox? It's precisely when I'm weak that I'm strong. How often have you said that to yourself? Probably not too often, especially in church. But that's where it's most true, in the spiritual life. It's when you're weak that you're strong. The very first opening prayer of today says the same thing in the same paradox. By the abasements of your Son, you have raised up the world. What sense does that make? And if it's true for Christ, it's true for us. So there it is. We think we know the crucifix, we think we know what that means, God redeemed the world, blah, blah, blah. But take a look. Raise your eyes to the Lord anew and contemplate. To the same Corinthians in another letter, Paul proclaimed the same paradox. He said, the weakness of God is stronger than humans. Christ on the cross. The madness, the folly of God is wiser than humans. That makes no sense humanly. It's madness. But it's God's madness. It's God's mystery. It's Christ's mystery. And that weakness is what redeemed the world. To teach us that it's by our weakness that we can redeem the world. That by our weakness the world is redeemed, not by our supposed strength. Because that's what lets God in. Because what do we learn from this? We learn patience, humility, trust, abandonment to God, compassion. As we've received compassion, so we give it to others. Understanding, love, a truly vulnerable heart, openness, willingness to be vulnerable as Christ was on the cross. What a great human quality. If you want to talk about heroic virtue, how about that one? Have the heroic enough virtue to be vulnerable, to be weak, to be open. Blessed are they who mourn, blessed are the meek, blessed are the merciful, the peaceable. That's the kind of weakness we're talking about. And that's the royal way to God and to Christ. Yes, to God, because don't forget, that's not just the face of humanity, which it is. It's the face of God, we believe, and it's true. God revealed God's self through that. So God is weak. God is humble. God suffers, as has been written very well, but you haven't heard very often. Where's get rid of our hardness of heart and open our minds to this truth? God is weak and vulnerable. Look around. Where's God? Where is this great tyrant God who controls everything? God should be able to control and fix everything, right? That's who God is. No, it's not. So much so that the atheists say, look, there's no God. Why does God allow this? Why does God allow that? If God is God, God is all-powerful. No, God is all weak. Quietly, deeply, in the depths of openness and vulnerability, compassion. That's who God is, and that's where God works. as Christ reveals. So when are we going to get this? When are you going to realize that it's precisely that through our weakness that we come to God, through all our sufferings, through our lack of control, through our helplessness and our hopelessness. That's where God speaks. That's where God acts. That's how God acts. With humility and patience in our own shadow self, our thorns in the flesh become the gateway to God. Not by any supposed power we have that mirrors the supposed power that God has. We got to take a whole new look at this. Ourselves, Christ, and God in this perspective. So that hopefully we'll be able to say someday, gladly will I boast of my weaknesses and sufferings, because that's when Christ's power is revealed to me and works in me. When I'm weak, then I'm strong. It's when I do it wrong that I do it right. Okay, you haven't heard this very often. That's why we need to open our hearts to the message, paradoxical message that the Lord presents to us today. It's a key to understanding God more deeply, who God really is, and Christ more deeply, what the redemption really means and how it works. It's a key to understanding ourselves more deeply, loving and accepting ourselves in all our unmanageable dimensions, in all our weakness, so that like God, we can do the same for one another.